Hey guys, tonight we're diving nose first into one of the most overlooked horrors in world history, the smell of a medieval castle. That's right, the ancient stone palaces where kings, queens, knights, and more than a few barnyard animals all tried to pretend everything was perfectly normal, even as the aroma of 400 unwashed humans and about as many dogs floated through the freezing air. If you've ever thought your teenager's bedroom was a biohazard, buckle up, because what passed for a fresh castle scent in 1340 would get you evicted from most modern apartments. Before we open the nostril gates of time, take a second to gently like, subscribe, and leave a comment, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of historical nose assault. Let me know if there's a medieval smell you're irrationally afraid of. Spoiler: chamber pots. Go ahead, dim those lights, switch your fan to full white noise, settle into your non-straw mattress, and brace yourself. Lull yourself to sleep with the comforting realization that at no point tonight will you step in anything suspicious, unless your dog gets ideas. Pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what castle life actually reeked of? Did they really use herbs to cover up the stench, or just marinate in odor-body odor? Would you recognize the scent of a medieval feast, or run away screaming? Did royal laundry get washed, or was it just replaced every year or so? Were chamber pots ever emptied, or was shoveling waste medieval cardio? Tonight, congratulations, you've just woken up as an anonymous castle resident, possibly a cook, possibly a courtier with a sinus infection. It's 1372. It smells historic, and you're about to find out what that really means. Stepping through the great wooden doors, you're greeted by a blast of cool, damp air that's trying very hard to be mysterious, but mostly just smells like wet fur, stone, and the vague panic of someone who's lost a chamber pot. Compared to the outside, it's a humid, earthy wall of aromas that screams, "Welcome." It takes a moment for your eyes, and your nose, to adjust. Medieval castles aren't known for their mood lighting, unless you count the occasional flicker of torchlight that throws more shadows than clarity. The air seems to hug you, wrapping itself in thick ribbons around your shoulders, heavy with centuries of secrets and the promise that, somewhere nearby, something once very much alive decided to die on the spot. You wonder, not for the last time, how anyone managed to survive in here without inventing the stick of deodorant. Above you, the stone arches drip languidly, each drop echoing into the vast hall with the precision of a medieval torture device. Suspenseful, relentless, and a little bit smug. The floor is paved with enormous slabs of stone, each worn smooth by the shuffling of generations. You get the sense that every footfall is adding to an endless invisible tally, and that the stones themselves are judging your choice of footwear. As you venture further in, the blend of old smoke, mildew, and roasting meat becomes stronger, conjuring up mental images of feasts gone horribly wrong. Somewhere, a fireplace coughs out a cloud of ancient soot, scenting the air with nostalgia and the faint hope that it'll cover the stench of unwashed tunics. Mixed into this medieval potpourri is a lingering, almost heroic, note of rodent. You spot the culprit, a mouse, pausing on the flagstones as if to say, "This is my castle now," before vanishing into a crack in the wall, tail quivering like a victory banner. Despite the questionable fragrance profile, there's an undeniable thrill to it. This isn't your average air-freshened entryway. No one has spritzed vanilla essence or hidden a pinecone sachet. Here, every molecule of mustiness is authentic. Centuries of damp cloaks, muddy boots, and rainwater funneled directly in on purpose by architects who, frankly, had other priorities. It's a kind of olfactory honesty you only get when you stop cleaning after the 12th century. Your footsteps tap and squelch, yes, squelch, down a narrow corridor that curves gently away from the entrance hall. Each time you try to take a deep breath, you're met with another collision of scents, wild herbs strewn rush-like over the floors in a brave but failed attempt at air purification, sweet and sharp as if a medieval herbalist got slightly carried away. A whiff of tallow candles, resolutely smoky and faintly reminding you of every blackout you've ever suffered through, and somewhere, underlying it all, the indefinable musk of anticipation. For what? You're not sure. Possibly a surprise puddle. If the nose is a guide, this castle is a living thing, a creature that inhales everything its inhabitants bring in, and exhales a mix of old stories and barely contained chaos. Here, the air itself is another character. It won't let you forget you're walking through hundreds of years' worth of lives, loves, feasts, betrayals, and possibly the world's oldest damp sock. So you pause, breathe in, carefully, and step further into the maze, every scent a breadcrumb trail to the history waiting around the next shadowy corner. And if the castle seems to be watching you, well, maybe it's just making sure you wipe your feet. As sunlight creeps through arrow slits and iron-grilled windows, the scent only deepens. Medieval castles were fortresses, yes, but nobody ever called one an oasis of fresh air. Stone walls locked in the cold and, inconveniently, yesterday's aromas. That means if last night's dinner was spiced turnip porridge and the Lord's hunting boots were drying by the fire, you're getting both, right up your nostrils before the roosters finished crowing. Let's talk about the star of the morning, dental hygiene, castle style. Forget your peppermint gels and sonic brushes. The fashion of the era dictated a grab-anything that's rough approach. Linen or old cloth, usually already well loved from 100 washings, made an appearance alongside kitchen ashes. In theory, the mild grit would scour your teeth. In practice, let's just say medieval toothbrushing was more about ambition than effect. On a really good day, you might get a whiff of mint or sage, since some households kept a few potted herbs around, and those lucky enough to have access would sometimes gnaw a sprig in a desperate lunge toward fresh breath. Lords, ladies, cooks, stable boys, united by oral aroma. Socializing before breakfast was a tactical event. Thousands of polite nods substituted for close-quarters greeting, and if you've ever wondered why so many medieval portraits show people looking pensive and close-mouthed, now you know. Servants had the worst of it. They darted around, lighting the fires and hauling water, often with barely a rinse to their names. Water wasn't always plentiful or safe, since the moat wasn't exactly Evian, and the well could be 100 stony steps down. Still, for the diligent or the desperately self-aware, a cracked clay cup of water served to at least swish out last night's memories, and maybe a few bits of oatcake, too. And yet, for all the haze of dragon breath, the castle community got on just fine. After all, this was the norm. More important than morning mints was keeping up with ritual and routine. Each morning's olfactory ordeal was only part of the castle's symphony of awakening. Heavy doors slammed, kitchen pots clattered. Somewhere, a young page with a particularly offensive yawn found himself exiled to fetch fresh straw for the rushes. Gossip, nearly as thick as the morning air, travelled faster than fire, as chambermaids compared notes on who snored loudest and whose slippers appeared mysteriously chewed. By late morning, with herbs burning in the great hall, things improved. The air grew tolerable, helped along by open shutters, bustling activity, and the subtle camouflage of stronger midday smells. Breakfast, served more for necessity than pleasure, added its own layer to the castle's unique bouquet, usually involving salted fish or weak ale. Not even linen and ashes could really compete. Still, in all its fragrant glory, morning inside a medieval castle was both communal ordeal and bonding ritual. This, dear listener, is where all the drama unfolds. Forget the Instagram-perfect brunch. This is a rough-and-tumble food brawl where civility is optional and you're as likely to eat as you are to dodge a flying drumstick. Long wooden tables ripple down the length of the hall, packed shoulder to shoulder with villagers, nobles, and the occasional sheep. Because yes, livestock sometimes gets an invite, or at least, sneaks in through the side door. The air is thick with laughter, gossip, and the low hum of barter. Someone is always trying to trade a turnip for a slab of oily pork, and negotiations sound suspiciously like threats. Let's talk food. If you're picturing lavish platters of glistening roast, well, sometimes, if the harvest was bountiful and the Lord generous, your dreams might come true. More often, though, you're greeted by planks of stale bread, dubious stews, and cheeses that double as medieval weapons. For drinks, ale is the drink of choice for everyone, including children, a medieval loophole to clean water, and are consumed by the goblet or sloshed onto the floor in moments of great storytelling or sudden fistfights. And oh, the stories shared over these feasts. These are not your gentle fireside tales. Here, stories are currency and bravado is the glue. While old Bartholomew swears on his mother's grave that he once outdrank a Norman knight, the minstrels, half musicians, half stand-up comedians, roam the tables, plucking out tunes and roasting everyone in the room in verse. If you hear laughter that's just a bit too loud, be suspicious, you might be the subject of their next rhyme. But not everyone is there to party. At the high table, nobles and their closest sycophants eye the crowd with practiced boredom. They drop casual insults like breadcrumbs, quietly judging everyone's table manners and plotting whose lands to poach next. Below the salt, a literal line of salt-dividing status, a different pecking order plays out. Gossips, servants, and hangers-on dart in and out, stealing bites or news where they can. Every exchange pulses with give and take, a careless word here, a misplaced glance there, and tomorrow's dinner guest could become this evening's scandal. Of course, the Great Hall is also the heart of communal life. Weddings, christenings, victories, and defeats, everything funnels into these walls, magnified by the echo of hundreds of hungry, hopeful voices. Every feast is a stage and everyone is performing, from the cook to the lord to that one juggler who won't stop showing off after 3 ales. For the villagers, a successful feast is more than good food. It's proof that the world is still turning, that in the face of storms or poor harvests, the hall will hold. Eventually, the night winds down. Candles gutter low. The bravest souls linger to brag one last time, or to swipe a chunk of cold meat before the dogs claim it. And as the hall empties and the embers fade, the echoes of the day, of laughter, hunger, ambition, linger, sunk deep in the stink of spilled ale and roasted duck. The Great Hall, not just for feasts, but a living memory in stone and oak, where hope endures as long as someone keeps the fire burning. The kitchen is the castle's beating heart, pumping out sustenance both humble and elaborate for everyone from the lord to the lowliest serving boy. At dawn, its cavernous fireplaces are already blazing, attended by bleary-eyed cooks whose aprons bear yesterday's flour and a faint sense of existential dread. The menu is repetitive. Think endless porridge, the kind tough enough to find work as medieval mortar. If you're lucky, a kitchen maid might sneak you the heel of a day-old loaf, but don't expect jam. The closest thing is grease drippings, or perhaps a rare smudge of honey, if you're standing close when it's doled out. The cacophony is relentless. The slap of dough on wooden boards, knives hacking away at mystery cuts, the splash and hiss of water as someone tries, in vain, to scrub a pot that may predate the king upstairs. Over all this rushes a soundtrack of shouted orders and muttered curses, which meld with the din of scurrying rats who, in this kingdom, hold tenure. Life in the kitchens is not for those who cherish order or dignity. It's a place where failure is measured in inches of blackened crust and where innovative cuisine means finding new ways to disguise turnips. Despite the frenzy, there are moments of camaraderie. The kitchen staff wield inside jokes sharper than their cleavers, and a knowing glance can spark laughter when the lord's fussy nephew demands a real egg in January. Of course, the scullions, those at the bottom of the pecking order, find little glory in this. Their main task is to shift enormous cauldrons and skewer miscellaneous proteins, hoping none of them bite back. For cooks and servants, the day's first meal happens standing up, between tasks, and is likely to be whatever's left from the soldiers' last round. Steam hangs heavy, swirling with aromas gorgeous and questionable: smoked eel, boiling cabbage, fresh bread, and something that smells suspiciously like regret. Eating it all is a small win, and nobody lingers. The next course is always disaster, simmering and seconds away from spilling onto the floor if you're not quick with your feet, or quick with your blame shifting. The kitchen is also a hotbed for rumors, with gossip moving even faster than the scullions. There are updates about which noble arrived late last night, who might be nicking sugar, and wild speculation about the lord's mysterious rash. For those who live beneath the stairs, these whispers are more nourishing than the watery stew. Beware, the kitchen is not for faint noses. With so many bodies, beasts, and barrels jammed together, the collective aroma is complex. Imagine onions, sweat, dog fur, and the gentle undertone of something spoiled, all magnified by castle stone and low ceilings. If you're a visitor, the staff watch as you struggle to suppress a cough or blink watery eyes. They've inhaled so much smoke and vaporized lard that they're immune, more chimney than human at this point. So, as you wipe soot from your sleeve and maneuver around an oncoming piglet, escaped, again, remember, the kitchen is chaos incarnate, the birthplace of both daily bread and disaster. But it's also a crucible where bonds are forged, secrets kept, and, against all odds, breakfast is served, sometimes burnt, sometimes cold, but always with a dash of resilience. And maybe, just maybe, a pinch of something sweet, if the kitchen gods are unusually kind. The nobles' bedrooms, royal, yet rank. Soft tapestries, expensive wood, and probable bed bugs. The noble's bedchamber is a masterpiece of medieval luxury, if your idea of luxury involves old sweat, lavender sachets that lost hope in the 1200s, and the constant suspicion that someone's goat is sleeping under your bed. The moment you step inside, your nose is greeted by a complex symphony of wealthy neglect, beeswax polish, wilting bouquets, and a faint undercurrent of damp wool. Heavy curtains, once crimson, now more reminiscent of tired berries, hang over child-sized windows, shutting out both winter's chill and anything resembling fresh air. The four-poster bed dominates the chamber, its carved posts serving both as ostentatious displays of craftsmanship and as handy anchor points for draping moth-eaten canopies. The canopy's original purpose? To keep startled spiders from landing directly onto the nobly coiffed scalp. A practical invention, if not one that entirely succeeded. At first glance, the bedding tempts you. Velvet quilts, silken pillows, and an embroidered coverlet featuring a scene of hunting stags or, just as likely, the family's heraldic griffin chasing what is either a sheep or a rather confused villager. But this luxury comes at a pungent price. Linens are scrubbed perhaps yearly and aired on days with minimal ambient poultry activity. The same blanket that kept the Lord warm last winter is almost certainly still rank with a legacy of 15 generations, each of whom had equally poor ventilation and the same indifferent attitude towards bed hygiene. Do not imagine for a moment these beds were private havens, either. A noble could expect a retinue of retainers, ladies-in-waiting, squires, and, occasionally, the local bishop's nephew, to be curled up in corners or on trundle beds, emitting their own odors. With privacy a wishful notion, conversations drift late into the night, gossip about alliances, speculations on the cook's new gravy, and complaints about the chill draft that, despite all hangings and tapestries, always finds its way in. Personal touches were everywhere, but none so effective at chasing comfort as they were at trapping more smells. Sachets of herbs, meant to sweeten the air, hung from every knob and post, filled long ago with lavender, rosemary, or rue, now overwhelmed by the ghosts of collective body heat and the inevitable waft of wet dog from the resident hound curled dutifully at the fireside. Occasionally, nobles retreated here to escape the political pressure of the hall, only to engage in the nightly struggle of negotiating shared bed space with an oblivious mastiff or, worse, a cousin who snores loudly enough to drown out the creak of the windmill outside. Let us not ignore the ever-present threat beneath the mattress: insects. Ticks, fleas, and the infamous bed bug thrived in the folds of feather-stuffed bolsters. With washing an infrequent, special occasion affair, think, once a month when the bishop visits, or when someone important mistakes your comforter for a dead wolf, sleep was a negotiation with nature. If one woke up refreshed, it was not for lack of nightly battle with the invertebrate multitudes. Still, amid the itchy turmoil and hints of livestock, there was glamour. A dressing table mirrored the light of guttering candles onto bronze hair combs and pewter ewers, while an ornate chest held silks imported at great expense, one of the only things in the room guaranteed not to bite. The tapestries, even when faded and furred at the edges, showed scenes of heroic ancestors and mythic beasts, reminders that even among lice and lords, prestige must be displayed. Imagine hauling a year's worth of sweat, food stains, and mysterious blotches down to the riverbank with your neighbors, who are both allies and silent judges. There's no hiding in the crowded bustle, surrounded by the flapping banners of lost modesty, every undergarment you own on public display, fluttering in the breeze like the drab flags of a weary army. There are no detergents, no gentle cycles, and certainly no cheery fabric softener. Instead, you face a battered trough and a bucket of lye. Lye is made from ashes and water, but if you're feeling prosperous, maybe there's a dash of animal fat, too. This caustic homebrew eats grime, but also gnaws on the fabric. Family heirlooms? Now threadbare. Grandma's best linen? Reborn as rags. The process is not for the faint-hearted. Your first task is to soak your linens overnight, a process that infuses everything with the subtle perfumes of the river's questionable purity. In the morning, it's time to stomp, beat, and scrub. Some villagers favor the club method, rhythmically drumming cloth against rocks, sending sprays of muddy water and flecks of ancient filth flying. Others just swirl the fabric in water and hope for divine intervention. Don't get too comfortable. The riverbank is a stage for more than just domestic heroics. It's also where town gossip bubbles up like soapy suds. Whose tunic is suspiciously blood-stained? Who has patched their clothes with sackcloth? The clues to every scandal and every social standing are on display, staining the cloths and the reputations behind them. Laundry day is, in a way, the medieval version of social media: oversharing, judgment, and schadenfreude, all underpinned by the desperate hope for a clean slate. The elements rarely cooperate. If it rains, your linens grow heavier and the mud less forgiving. If it's sunny, the wind threatens to send your best, or at least least disgusting, tunic sailing downstream. Birds above add their own critiques in the form of droppings. And always, there's the threat of children, dogs, or the occasional opportunistic thief making off with your only pair of decent hose. When the washing is done, wringing out the water is as much about desperation as technique. You twist again, arms aching, only to realize that dry is more relative than absolute. The final stage, drying, means draping your half-clean laundry on bushes, rocks, and whatever sunlight you can find. And then you wait. Weather and fortune permitting, your clothes will be stiff, faded, and barely improved. But you, at least, have done your duty. At sunset, you will gather your shrunken, battered linens, exchange one last round of gossip, and trudge home. Maybe you caught a new infection from the river, maybe your old stains are just fainter, but for a moment, just a moment, you are cleaner than yesterday. That's medieval laundry day, a ritual of hope against all olfactory odds, a seasonal pursuit of impossible cleanliness, and proof that the human spirit and stomach can survive almost anything. Down a quiet corridor and behind a suspiciously stained door lies the medieval toilet. Imagine a deep hole in the floor, a hint of crushed mint, and the honest aroma of 1,000 previous users. Honestly, your nose may never recover. Welcome to the last frontier of medieval hospitality, the privy. Forget wallpaper and scented candles. This was an experience that gripped you by the nostrils and refused to let go. In a stone-walled castle of echoes and secrets, privacy was rare, but you could always count on the privy for some solitude. The catch: the company you were spared in person was often replaced by some deeply persistent odors and the occasional rat, who probably thought of your visit as uninvited company. Medieval toilets weren't just a hole and hope. The more advanced privies, if advanced is really the word, featured long wooden seats perched over, fortified, naturally, chutes, which plummeted down to cesspits or the moat below. Imagine sitting there, trousers at ankles, with the wind whistling up where you'd rather it didn't. Outside, you might hear the clink of a guard's armor. Inside, the delicate plop of history in the making. Hygiene may not have been a core curriculum in the 14th century, but even medieval inhabitants drew the line at total squalor. To combat the relentless stench, people tossed in aromatic herbs, mint, lavender, even rosemary, a desperate gesture, like blowing perfume at a bonfire. Peasants might have settled for rushes or straw, but in a castle, there was at least a token attempt at civility. Let's be honest, though, beneath the damp stone, something primeval always seemed to win. Then there was the matter of waste disposal. In our modern era, out of sight is out of mind, and a flush handles the rest. For a medieval household, however, someone, the unfortunate gong farmer, needed to shovel out the cesspit when it threatened to overflow. This was a job so unsavory that payment often included not just coins but clean clothes, a new pair of boots, or, perhaps, a promise that you'd never have to do it again. These unsung heroes of sanitation are seldom celebrated in the great tapestries, but without them, castle living would have become unbearable. In spite of all, the privy was a social equalizer. Lords, ladies, cooks, and knights all made the same uneasy journey down the corridor. The medieval diet, heavy on meats, grains, and rough ale, practically guaranteed frequent visits. For all their grand halls and bestiary sculptures, castles were as dependent on these humble cubicles as they were on their battlements. Little wonder, then, that many kept sensible chamber pots in private rooms for nighttime emergencies, a dash of convenience in an otherwise perilous nocturnal world. If you happen to be a guest in a great hall banquet, beware the after-effects of rich stews and copious wine. The route to the privy, slippery with centuries of use, could be a minor adventure in itself. Mind your step, especially at night, in the glow of a flickering taper. More than one noble has lost dignity to a misjudged step or, worse, the unexpected presence of an angry goose. In short, the medieval privy reveals a lot about past lives, practical, undaunted, and occasionally mischievous. Here, surrounded by history's most pungent legacy, you gain new respect for simple comforts, and perhaps vow never to take them for granted again. So next time you hear tales of high-born intrigue or noble romance, remember, every court had its secrets. Some, however, were best left firmly behind that suspiciously stained door. But what exactly was in these mysterious concoctions? Combing one's hair wasn't just a daily routine. It was an event, sometimes performed with a level of theatricality that would make a modern influencer blush. Picture this: the eldest daughter standing at the window, comb in hand, elbow deep in goose fat. Meanwhile, the family's one good mirror fogs up with anticipation, or possibly in protest. The goal? Of course, rituals varied wildly by class and century. For the nobility, it was not uncommon for a servant to wield a comb with the delicate precision of a surgeon, all while the master recited poetry or plotted next season's wardrobe revolution. In contrast, common folk made do with ramshackle combs carved from horn or wood, if the family goat hadn't eaten them. There are tales of entire households pausing their day's work for the combing hour, a time reserved for untangling not just hair, but also the latest gossip. Hygiene, as a concept, was more malleable than modern sensibilities might allow. Soaps were available, yes, but baking them into one's routine was as much a mark of leisure as it was of cleanliness. Some debated whether water, left to ferment in a wooden bucket, was actually an improvement over simply ignoring the problem. Whether invigorated or merely bamboozled, your scalp was going to smell like something. Smell, in fact, was everything. The olfactory arms race meant that every household was an experimental fragrance laboratory. Musk was the gold standard, though its source, the glands of the musk deer, was best left undiscussed at the breakfast table. Those who couldn't afford musk resorted to creatively scented camphor balls, orange peels pinned behind the ear, or simply hanging bits of herbs from their hair as if cosplaying a Renaissance salad. Shaving was for the ambitious, and throughout most of the countryside, a beard comb could double as a weapon. The annual shearing of grandpa became a local holiday in some parts, where the youngest child approached with scissors and a prayer. Elsewhere, moustaches were trained, waxed, and twisted until they resembled anything but hair, often more sculpture than follicle. In the end, to comb or not to comb was rarely a real question. Everyone combed. The only variables were frequency, ceremony, and what olfactory horrors accompanied the act. If ever you become nostalgic for the romance of chivalric courts, picture yourself waking to find that your hair has absorbed the night's stew, and your only hope for respectability is Aunt Ermengarde's mysterious, slightly fizzing vial. In short, the path to beauty was tangled, fragrant, occasionally sticky, and never, ever simple. Nowhere in the castle is hope so persistent, or so thoroughly dampened by the realities of daily drudgery, as here, in the servants' quarters. The beds are little more than piles of straw and thin blankets, squashed so close that the only thing thinner than the sense of privacy is the actual walls themselves, which barely keep out the draft, much less the muffled squabbles from next door. There's a constant undertone of whispered gossip, punctuated by the snores of the overworked and the stealthy scurrying of something with tiny claws. Sleep comes in fits, if at all, as shift changes shuffle occupants in and out of the makeshift bunks at all hours. Much like a never-ending relay race, only the baton is replaced by a mop, and the finish line is always out of sight. Against one wall, a battered trunk attempts to contain all worldly possessions of 3 or more grown adults. A stray boot juts out. Someone's lucky bonnet dangles from a bent nail, permanently perfumed with a musky bouquet of sweat and cabbage. Within this organized chaos, every servant has their small ritual of reclamation: a ragged book, a carved bit of wood, a stolen moment of silence in the pre-dawn gloom. Each artifact is a tiny defiance, a way to mark time in a space that otherwise erases individual identity with the relentless efficiency of a scrubbing brush. Yet, camaraderie thrives here too, mostly out of necessity. If you're going to survive endless hours polishing gargoyle spouts or scrubbing out the Lord's hunting boots after a muddy day, you need allies. Tokens of friendship are swapped like contraband while the head cook's back is turned: a pilfered apple, a half-used stub of candle, whispered dreams of escape or improvement, usually delivered with a smile that's part hope, part pure madness. For every rivalry over who gets an extra blanket in winter or a rare slice of leftover pie, there are twice as many small acts of kindness: a cup of hot broth snuck to a sickly colleague, or someone risking a scolding to mend another's fraying tunic. The architectural flourishes in this area tell their own story of priorities. Unlike the grand halls and soaring ceilings above, down here the beams stoop so low you're forced into an involuntary humility, ducking both for the roof and when the Lord's quick-tempered footman stomps through on a midnight errand. There's little in the way of decorative carving, unless you count the etchings scratched into bed frames by lonely hands, dates, initials, sometimes snatches of prayers, or tally marks silently tracking the years. Windows, if they exist at all, are the tiniest slits barely admitting enough sun to check your own reflection, should you dare. But often, it's said you can hear the day's mood from above, the heavy steps or laughter of the family, the distant chimes of feasting, the echoing bark of a furious master searching for a mislaid letter or cold meal. Sometimes, a peculiar sort of comfort is drawn from this shared hardship. With every creaking board and midnight draft, there's the knowledge that you and your fellows are a silent engine, the unseen mechanism making the castle's grandeur possible. And in the flickering candlelight, after chores are finished and the world above lies silent, laughter can erupt without warning, a low, contagious kind that rings out, for just a moment, louder than the threat of rats or reprimand. In every castle, legends and ghosts supposedly haunt the high halls and spiral stairs. But if you ever want a real tale, slip down to the servants' quarters. For there, every tired body, every calloused hand, carries the true stories, the living history shaped not by the lords who dine on golden plates, but by those who sweep, scrub, and sleep in the grand shadows, forging kinship from hardship, and yes, surviving the functional funk one night at a time. If you've ever wondered why medieval knights looked so stoic in tapestries and oil paintings, it wasn't just a question of chivalric grit, it was often a desperate attempt to not breathe too deeply. The air inside the armory is thick, as if every exhalation from centuries ago still lingers between the racks of breastplates and battered helms. The scent profile is a vignette of old worlds, the tang of worn leather, aged but refusing to crack, mingling with the cold, metallic whisper of iron that's seen one too many battles and not nearly enough soap. Above it all hovers the undeniable note of mortal toil, a reminder that wearing armor was as much a testament to sheer endurance as it was to martial prowess. Step inside and your senses are immediately assaulted by the richness of animal hide, cured and cut and then painstakingly stitched into greaves, gauntlets, and boots that will never quite lose the ghost of the beast they came from. There is a primal connection here, man wrapped in animal, both seeking protection and power. The Knights Templar and their ilk did not simply don their leathers, they inhabited them, their sweat slowly becoming part of the suit with every campaign, every joust, every long, cold vigil. After a few seasons, the suit and the wearer were inseparable by more than just the buckles and straps. Their stories, and their scents, fused for all eternity. And then there is the steel, gleaming where it has been shined, dark and pitted where it's been neglected. Oiled to repel water, fingers, and the ravages of time, the chainmail and plate mail accrue a strange perfume over years of use. It is both sharp and earthy, a clash between the earthy essence of the world below and the metallic promise of technology above. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the soft clink as chainmail settles into a heap, its sound as much a part of the atmosphere as the ever-present musk. The oil used to keep rust at bay adds another olfactory note, a touch industrial, a touch medicinal, with a promise of labor and vigilance. But no inventory of the armory's aroma would be complete without admitting the role of regret. It's there, undeniable, hovering like a nervous squire at a tournament. Regret, in this instance, isn't just poetic, it's almost physical, born of the hours spent laboring beneath the summer sun during training, or waiting sleeplessly in cold dawns before battle. Regret is the knowledge that no matter how well you scrub, it's impossible to wash away the memory of fear and fatigue soaked into every inch of your gear. Imagine now, a knight at the end of a long campaign, unbuckling his cuirass in the dim, flickering lamplight. The air is heavy, the smell of hard-won survival enveloping him as much as the armor once did. He sighs, the sound echoing off stone walls, releasing not just breath but memories of charging ranks, clashing blades, and the heat of a body working past exhaustion. It's not a scent you walk away from unchanged. There is rough poetry to this medieval aroma, the blending of histories, materials, and bodily effort. Each waft is a story, each inhalation a step deeper into the past. The armory is not merely a place of weaponry but of transformation, where men became legends draped in leather and steel, their struggles immortalized in a scent as enduring as any myth. So linger here, just for a moment, and let your senses bear witness to what history too often leaves out: the real, raw, human truth at the heart of every legend, encoded forever in the pungent, undeniable perfume of the armory. The rare, exciting communal bath involves one large barrel, lots of tepid water, and a parade of users, each adding their unique touch. It starts fresh. By person number 6, it's soup. Few events in the old household calendar inspired more anticipation and more quiet dread than bath time. Imagine the logistics: only one spare tub, hauled out on special occasions. Water drawn and heated over fire, bucket by steamy bucket, then carefully poured into the tub. Perhaps in theory, it should have been a luxury, but as the water cooled and family members queued up, it became more like an endurance sport. The first bather had it best: crisp water, unclouded and inviting. Each additional family member, regardless of size or cleanliness, made a small but significant contribution to the evolving state of the water. A communal bath wasn't just a practicality, but a spectacle. Children competed to go first, elders invoked seniority, waving wooden spoons or towels as a kind of symbolic scepter. There were whispered debates and subtle games of strategy played out behind closed doors, and sometimes open ones, if little siblings were particularly boisterous. One could always tell who was slated for last by the resigned shuffle of their feet and their tendency to reappear an hour later, hair suspiciously dry. Let's not underestimate the influence of bath time on social dynamics. Each participant encountered a kind of moral puzzle. Do you scrub thoroughly, knowing the water must sustain several more users? Or do you politely leave something to wash tomorrow, out of courtesy to numbers 5, 6, and 7? For children, it was a lesson in sharing under duress. For adults, it was a reminder that true comfort and domestic bliss were, perhaps, distant goals. Stories abound from these evenings. One memorable tale involves Aunt Martha, whose bath-time preparedness was legendary. She would arrive armed with her own soap, a slightly moth-eaten bathrobe, and, on particularly cold nights, a woolen cap worn right into the tub. On the other hand, there was Cousin Edgar, who thought nothing of bringing a rubber duck, a rarity in itself, and then refusing to relinquish it for successive bathers. The Great Duck Incident is still a favorite anecdote among family elders, whispered like folklore every time bath day rolls around. Bath time's atmosphere, half practical, half performance, wove itself into family lore. There were the inevitable splash wars, the spectacularly failed attempts to maintain modesty behind a threadbare towel, and the communal effort to stop the youngest from appending the soap into oblivion. Afterward, the water, now lukewarm and cloudier than anything nature intended, was often hauled outside and poured over garden plants, liquid fertilizer, as Grandpa called it with a wink. As glad as everyone felt when the ordeal ended, these shared experiences forged a certain solidarity. The chilly sprint back to one's room, the borrowed nightgown, the laughter that ricocheted down drafty halls, they all formed a kind of glue, sticking everyone together through the darkest winters and the most fragrant springs. Even now, when modern showers have banished such rituals, the phrase "don't hog the bath" carries a lingering reminder of a time when warmth, privacy, and clean water were precious, and best enjoyed in small, carefully measured doses. The communal bath, with all its quirks and minor mortifications, reminds us that history is shaped not just by grand events, but by the messy, hilarious, all-too-human routines of everyday life. If the water wasn't hot enough and the tub never quite large enough, at least the tales it produced were endless, and the sense of togetherness, however fleeting, was very real. In the end, perhaps that's cleaner than any soap could promise. Church is the only place in the castle with consistently pleasant smells, thanks to clouds of incense, candles, and prayers for divine intervention, mostly in the form of better sanitation. Stepping into the chapel is an act of gentle relief for both the nose and the soul. Unlike the drafty corridors or the musty halls, the air here shimmers with a sense of purpose, thick with sacred aromas that cling to your clothes long after you leave. Elaborate candelabras and flickering beeswax candles perform a valiant task, chasing away shadows, masking less holy odors and lending the stone enclosure a rare, golden warmth. It's as if the divine intercedes not just on behalf of spiritual woes, but also those more earthly concerns, such as the smell of wet wool or the mishaps of medieval plumbing. The congregation assembles in a patchwork of linen, wool, and armor. Lords sit stiff-backed, weighed down by both their plate and their pride. Ladies, elaborate in lace and silk, clutch rosaries, and share whispered hopes for good harvests or healthy heirs. Even the commoners, permitted at the fringes, bow their heads with private petitions. In this brief pause from daily hardships, all are united by the uplifting perfume of frankincense, an olfactory bond that reminds everyone, if only for a while, that something finer than mud and sweat is possible. Yet the chapel offers more than just sensory refuge. It is the spiritual and communal heart of the castle, echoing with the low Latin chants of priests whose voices rise and fall like the tide. For many residents, these rituals are the anchor that moors them to meaning amidst tumult and uncertainty. The altar is a focal point, draped in fine cloth and lit by the holy glow of candles, where sacred relics, sometimes as humble as a finger bone or a fragment of cloth, are displayed with reverence, believed to grant protection, inspire awe, or at least offer a conversation topic over supper. But the rituals themselves are a complex dance of hope and practicality. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals mark the chapters of life, each observed with solemn gravity, layers of incense, and an occasional off-key hymn. Church holidays punctuate the calendar, dictating not just when to fast or feast, but offering rare occasions for joy, the singing of a familiar hymn, the rare smile of the usually severe chaplain, or simply the satisfaction of something sweet after a long Lenten fast. Beneath the holiness lingers a pragmatic undercurrent. Prayers for rain, victory, or averted plague are as heartfelt as those for forgiveness or souls in purgatory. The congregation's whispered pleas often betray anxieties about crop failures, marauding neighbors, or the unpredictable wrath of the feudal lord upstairs. The clergy, keenly aware of their own fragile position, balance spiritual assurance with practical advice, sometimes operating as mediators, scribes, and even amateur medics. The sanctuary doubles as a meeting house, court, or classroom, filling needs beyond the spiritual. Despite its sacred purpose, the chapel is not without politics. Patronage of the altar can be a subtle contest among noble families, with embroidered cushions or donated candlesticks serving as status symbols. Murmured alliances, sealed with a handshake in the nave, might later shape the fate of the entire castle. Still, during Mass, these rivalries are suspended in a hush of collective hope, the hope that somewhere above the cold stone vaults, a listening ear might turn favorable. As the final notes of the organ echo against the walls and the congregation files out, pockets filled with the lingering comfort of incense, reality returns. The madness of daily castle life resumes, yet for a moment, enveloped in perfumed tranquility, both peasant and prince have been reminded of something larger and more luminous than themselves. The promise that grace, if not better plumbing, is always within reach. Living in a place where animals freely meander means surrendering any illusion of boundaries. The front door is just a suggestion, a porous line easily crossed by muddy paws or peckish beaks. Morning coffee is often interrupted by a wet nose sniffing under the table or the clatter of chicken feet on a tile floor, accompanied by the faint soundtrack of bleating from somewhere just out of sight. The animals here are not merely guests. They are deeply embedded features of the daily landscape, shaping routines and expectations with a stubborn kind of generosity. For example, let's talk about wet dogs. Somehow, regardless of weather or bathing schedule, every dog achieves a state of perpetual dampness. It's an olfactory calling card. They announce their presence with a humid whiff of river or rain puddle. Towels become emergency blotters, and furniture gets draped in covers more for peace of mind than for any actual hope of protection. The notion of pet-free zones quickly dissolves. Instead, you begin to appreciate fur as an accessory and consider muddy paw prints a kind of temporary, living art. Chickens, on the other hand, are secret chaos agents. Focused on pecking at errant breadcrumbs, they march with questionable dignity through open doors, undeterred by shooing or gentle suggestions. Their feathers pop up in places feathers have no right to be. Inside boots, snugged between couch cushions, occasionally drifting into a cup of tea left unwatched for too long. Chickens do not observe the order of human living. They exist in a parallel timeline, defined by sunlight and scraps. Their presence is a reminder that nature works on its own clock and its own set of priorities. Goats rarely make a scheduled appearance, which is perhaps for the best. When they do, they are miniature hurricanes, chewing, nosing, exploring every crevice with shameless intent. A goat can turn a garden gate into an obstacle course and find the weak link in any neglected fence. The hum of rural life is uninterrupted except by their sudden, comic mischief, an overturned flower pot here, a disappearing shoelace there. If the dog is the loyal companion and the chicken the accidental house guest, the goat is the unpredictable neighbor with no respect for fences. None of this is a complaint. There is a serenity in learning to share your space so completely. Animal life collides and mingles with human routine, grounding even the most fastidious person in the practical realities of dirt, fur, and the great outdoors. Mess becomes an accepted part of the aesthetic. Any lingering traces of perfectionism are scrubbed away by muddy coats and scattered grain. Cleanliness, as it turns out, is a recurring negotiation, not a final destination. An afternoon spent sweeping damp paw prints off the floor guarantees nothing but more paw prints by dusk. Feather dust floats through sunbeams as you try, and fail, to tidy up. Yet in place of frustration, most days offer a kind of camaraderie, an acceptance that life, for all its messiness, is also warm, present, and full of surprise. Ultimately, animals anchor you to the small pleasures: a friendly snuffle at dusk, the raucous chorus of the henhouse at sunrise, a soft cheek pressed against your ankle just when you need grounding the most. In this space, order is less important than connection, and every scuffled corner tells the story of sharing your home, not just with other people, but with the persistent, loving chaos of the animal world. There's always someone boiling herbs. Step into any drafty corridor or sunlit alcove and you'll find at least one resident huddled over a steaming pot. This fragrant cauldron is less the refined art of a modern spa and more the practical magic of musty desperation. The cooks pretend it's all for the stew, but their sidelong glances over bundles of yarrow reveal more worry than hunger. Potions bubble and hiss on makeshift stoves, some meant to clear up a hacking cough, others as vague preventative measures against a host of unseen medieval menaces. Herbal remedy practitioners, half healer, half alchemist, all gossip, rule the healthy and the hopeful alike. They wield knowledge passed from grandmother to granddaughter, usually along with stern warnings about what not to touch and how not to die. First comes elderflower tea for the sniffles. If that fails, a pungent mash of garlic and honey is pressed into service, slathered over bread or, if you're unlucky, directly on your chest. There are whispered tales of someone once mistaking damp, smelly poultice for new bread at breakfast, and no one has quite recovered. Every gardener is, by necessity, an amateur pharmacist. Chamomile and valerian grow in the corners where the sun lingers, lemon balm beneath the kitchen windows. The apothecary's nook, crowded with little bottles and labeled sachets, occupies the warmest corner of the kitchen. Every plant is pressed into service: lavender to calm anxious children and anxious adults, mint for queasy bellies, nettles for anything that seems vaguely inflamed. Of course, not every solution is rooted in good science, or even cautious optimism. Some brews seem designed solely to test the patient's mettle, as if terrorizing a sore throat with burning horseradish will frighten it out of your body. Herb wielders are a tightly knit community, suspicious of outsiders and quick to defend the efficacy of their chosen leaves against that incredulous city doctor who visits twice a year. Theirs is an arsenal of trial and error, mostly error, and they accept the failures with a practiced shrug. It didn't work. Try less is the most common prescription. What the castle lacks in official medicine, it more than makes up for in sheer enthusiasm. And so, it continues. The scent of boiling herbs is as constant as the morning bells. The herbalists argue, recipes are endlessly tweaked, and every ailment meets a homemade match, some effective, some merely distracting. The castle becomes a patchwork of experiment and memory, a place where hope is grown in window boxes, and sickness is coaxed, fumed, and laughed out the door if not truly cured. Here, healing is less a science and more a communal ritual, steeped in tradition, and always smelling faintly of mint. On festival days, extra food, sweaty crowds, and over-perfumed nobles combine into a heady perfume of merriment and mayhem. Glade plugins would weep. For anyone wandering the city on festival day, your first clue that something's afoot is not the pealing of bells or the sight of banners, but the smell, an impossible bouquet that tells the entire city to abandon reason and submit to celebration. Wandering minstrels trail the sharp tang of brass Polish, roasted meats sizzle on open spits, their fatty sweetness drifting between the scents of fresh-cut garlands and hastily washed cobblestones. Beneath all this, the underlying aroma of sweat, excitement, and accumulated anxiety clings to the air like a slightly damp cloak. Festival days append the city's usual olfactory order. The stables are swept in anticipation of guests, which only succeeds in stirring up the must of old straw and manure. Merchants roll out barrels of spiced wine, peat-fired sausages, honey cakes, and every fried morsel that oil and imagination can devise. These foods leave a lingering haze that settles even on the finery of the city's elite, refusing to be disguised by sprays of rosewater or lemon verbena. The result is a unique scent profile, part country fair, part perfumery, part crowded locker room. If the crowds are jubilant, so too are the pickpockets, cut purses, and fast-fingered fortune seekers. Foul play doesn't just lurk in the shadows. It perfumes the air with adrenaline, fear, and the sudden, stomach-twisting realization that one's coin purse is considerably lighter. There's a reason veteran festivalgoers tie their belongings with double knots and keep their wits sharper than their knives. Of course, nobles, ever eager to assert their status, arrive doused in the most extravagant fragrances available. They stride through the crowds leaving trails of musk, sandalwood, and rare imported essences. Stand too close, and you'll find yourself blinking away tears, wondering if you've been gassed by a very expensive flower. Not to be outdone, vendors hawk their own olfactory distractions. Incense sticks smolder, promising luck or love, depending on the pitch of the moment. Perfume sellers drift through the melee spraying testers like holy water, hoping to find a buyer, or at least to mask their own wares with clouds of citrus and pine. As night falls, the scentscape shifts. The sweetness of earlier delights gives way to spilled ales and the embers of fire pits, mingling with an undercurrent of smoke, sweat, and mystery. Somewhere, an overeager reveler might tumble into a fountain, adding the smell of wet velvet and bruised fruit to the mix. Couples sneak into dark corners, exchanging whispered secrets and the mingled perfumes of nervous anticipation. It is a fragrant chaos, both celebratory and faintly dangerous. One moment, you're buoyed by the scent of frying dough and revelry. The next, you're caught in the wake of a sprinting thief or an unexpected brawl. On festival days, the city's scents are not just remembered, but felt, worn like a second skin and carried home on your clothes. When the festivities end and the torches gutter out, the city exhales, and what lingers is a reminder: merriment and mayhem have a smell all their own. Yet, as your rush of survival instinct surges, you can't help but notice how the low arches above you drip with condensation, each drop underscoring the silence. The only other sound is your own heartbeat, pounding against your ribs like a jailer's fist. Dungeons are supposed to be cold and miserable, that's the job description, but this one feels particularly sinister. It isn't just a hole in the ground. This one has stories beneath the stone, a place cobbled together by years of secrets, suffering, and whatever passed for justice in a darker age. You take a careful step, boots squelching on the flagstones. There's no welcoming committee, just the shadowy promise of more tunnels ahead. The walls are slick with generations of moisture, every curve etched by hands you'll never meet. Sometimes you think you hear a whisper, just out of reach. Is it the wind? Or something less comforting, a memory trapped between the rocks? It's widely believed that every dungeon worth its name comes with chains, rusted iron rings, and the skeletons of lost hopes. That's not wrong, but it's not the whole truth either. True dungeon designers, the connoisseurs of sorrow, layer in more subtle torments. That gnawing sense that you're being watched isn't paranoia, it's the clever engineering of a place built to be hopeless. The passage narrows, bending slightly, so you brush your shoulder against icy stone. It's almost comforting. Almost. Your torch flickers, shadows stretching long and impossibly thin, as if something just beyond the edge of the light is moving with you. There's a faint clatter in the distance. Rat? Bone? Your mind supplies options you refuse to consider too deeply. Every dungeon tailors its terrors. Some use the promise of pain, others, the removal of time, no sunrise, no voices, only darkness and the dripping metronome overhead. But here's the worst part, the something worse. Sometimes it's not about what's visible at all. It's about what the dungeon does to the mind. You start counting steps, then lose track. Were you turning left? Has this hallway curved back on itself, or are you imagining it? That's when despair, stone, and the unseen begin to replace hope. Of course, not all dungeons are intended for the guilty. Some are meant for those who know too much, heroes caught on bad days, or the unlucky few who wandered somewhere they shouldn't. The why of your presence is rarely comforting. In dungeons, motives are irrelevant. All that matters is endurance and a strange sort of faith that someone will come looking for you, or that the lock is rusty and you're clever. Remember the stories. Many a legend was born in a pit like this. When you run your hands over the mortar, you think of names carved in the dark, promises scratched in hopes someone would one day read them. Maybe what makes these places truly dreadful isn't simply the misery, but the hope that clings on, even when logic says it shouldn't. So you keep moving, tracing your way past hollow-eyed statues or shivering shackles, refusing to let the gloom settle in your bones. You recite jokes in your head, scraps of poetry, names of friends, anything to stave off the silence that wants to own you. That's the true cruelty of the dungeon. It asks a question: can you be alone and not break? Eventually, the corridor turns, opens to a heavier door, marked only by centuries of desperate scratches. You pause, listening for anything beyond. Breathless. On the other side, there might be freedom. Or another level darker still, someplace the light of your torch cannot touch. And yet, you take the next step. Because, in tales and lives alike, the only way through despair, stone, and something worse, is forward. The best-smelling spot in the castle, if you ignore the ever-present manure. Flowers, sunshine, and a whiff of compost. Breathe in. Ignore the goose. Wander through the gardens, and suddenly castle life smells a lot less like unwashed chamber pots and a lot more like early morning in the countryside. Wildflowers cluster along the pebbled pathways, their colors a deliberate attempt to outshine the gray stones and brown mud that dominate elsewhere. Roses, carefully cultivated and jealously guarded by the head gardener, burst into bloom beside humble marigolds and scraggly herbs. The air is humid and earthy. It's life, breaking through centuries of stone. But you can't forget the reason these gardens are so lively: relentless, back-breaking toil, and, most notably, manure. Lots of it. Exotic floral scents swirl with pungent offerings from horses, cows, and, yes, the inevitable goose, who is to be avoided at all costs unless you fancy a chase and a peck on the ankle. Medieval garden design was half aesthetics, half practicality, and every bed of violets doubled as a salad, a medicine cabinet, or a privacy screen. Behind the riot of green and color, human hands have tilled, weeded, and lugged baskets brimming with steaming fertilizer. Nothing in this neat, lovely chaos grew by accident. Sunshine, when it arrives, streams through tangled leaves and casts moving shadows across the stone benches. Gardeners, stoic, sunburnt, and occasionally cursing softly, move in measured rhythms. They are the keepers not just of plants, but of knowledge: which leaf soothes a scratch, which blossom can kill a rat, and which garden corner the cook never inspects for a snatched apple or sprig of mint. They know the goose's routines, and they avoid her with a practiced sidestep. Beyond the formal plots lies the kitchen yard, the engine room of edible things. No showy blooms here, just straight rows of roots, dense tangles of beans, and squat towers of cabbages. Chickens scratch, oblivious to their important role in pest control and breakfast supply. The hum of insects is constant, punctuated by the occasional clatter and squawk. The kitchen yard is where many castle meals begin, and everyone, servant and lord alike, respects it as much as the chapel or the ramparts. Without these gardens, no one eats. And then, at the furthest edge, the orchard leans against the wall. Gnarled apple trees, older than the youngest servants, offer up fruit in late summer. In spring, the whole yard breathes sweet with blooms and the distant, hopeful buzz of bees. The orchard is a rare spot for unhurried conversation. Here, in the shade, secrets are swapped, gossip is fermented, and young lovers pass hurried notes, while the goose eyes them from the distance with clear suspicion. Of course, you can't discuss the gardens without mentioning compost. Piles of it sit, steaming quietly, their contents ranging from vegetable trimmings to truly alarming bits of refuse. The alchemy that happens here is viewed with both reverence and mild distaste. Some say there's a magic in it, taming rot into richness, a daily resurrection of sorts. A walk through the gardens is a lesson in medieval priorities: survival, beauty, and, above all, a tolerance for things that stink but feed you and your roses. It's easy to forget, amid the birdsong and scent of crushed mint, exactly where all this growth comes from. But one step too close to the compost heap, or one careless encounter with the resident goose, and you'll be forcefully reminded that in castle life, the sweet and the sour take root together. So wander with care, admire the blooms, note the herbs, and, if you value your ankles, definitely ignore the goose. Somewhere, a faint wood smoke drifts through a hairline crack beneath the heavy door, smudging out the last vestiges of candlelight still flickering bravely against the hour. It is a scent that has become as routine as the setting of the sun, woven into the very memory of the castle's stones. You lie in bed, cocooned by darkness, aware of how each breath you draw tastes faintly of the fireplace below, bittersweet, reminding you of smouldering logs and stories only told when the world is hushed. The air seems to press in, thick with lingering aromas. The wool blanket, heavy and scratchy, holds onto the essence of damp sheep and lanolin, earthy, honest, and grounding. If you press your face into its folds, there's a living texture there, the quiet persistence of life even in the dead of night. And then, under it all, the faint, waxy tang of shoe leather, untouched and waiting at the foot of the bed. It is the smell of journeys not yet taken, feet at rest but not at peace. You listen, and the hush deepens. The castle's rafters stretch and creak, the wooden bones of the place shifting with the upswell and downswell of cooling air. Every tick from the distant hall clock is muffled. The walls themselves seem to absorb sound, as if trapping stories in the stonework. You are both apart from and a part of this breathing, sleeping structure. This olfactory cocktail, dense and unyielding, colors the midnight hour in ways sunlight never could. It is here, in the midst of it, that memories find their strongest foothold. The smoke calls up tales of laughter by the hearth, of hands warming by the flames, the subtle promise that tomorrow will dawn much as today has ended, wrapped in safety and soft edges. The wool blanket scent is the history of beds before yours, sleepers whose secrets seeped into the fabric. Shoe leather. Perhaps it's a reminder that each day ends in rest, and each night in the promise of new steps to take. Outside, moonlight sketches the window stones in blue-gray, unattainable and cool, and even the night's breezes hesitate to enter. All that exists is the close, almost physical presence of these mingled aromas. The room becomes its own small world, ruled by smell and sensation as much as by thought or dream. Here, nostalgia and presence run together. You recall a dozen other midnights, other rooms, and yet this one moment weighs more, feels thicker. Through it all, you sense a transition, a gentle passage from day's clarity to midnight's opaqueness. The night carries its own sense, but it also brings a weight, the knowledge that nothing will disturb this dense mix until morning. Even your thoughts move slowly, as if the heavy stew of odors permeates the mind as much as the body. The smell of the dying fire is time itself, moving onward with the ashes. The wool, layered and unyielding, is the passage of seasons. Silent shoe leather is patience, waiting for first light. By the doorway, the floor settles. Somewhere downstairs, a log pops in the hearth, a tiny, momentary sharpness, quickly lost. All else remains the same, a heavy, fragrant now, where nothing changes and nothing needs to. In the final seconds before sleep, the room wraps you tight. This is the nightly overture, not a lullaby, but a curtain of air and memory that says, here, for a few sweet hours, you are held. And all that remains, at midnight, is the aroma. How do you defend yourself when the invisible enemy is everywhere? On door handles, in water, in the very air you breathe. Pre-modern societies, lacking our germ theory but brimming with creativity and superstition, answered with a kind of defensive olfactory architecture. Facing the Black Death, your ancestors slathered their thresholds with pungent concoctions. Windowsills held bowls of vinegar, pockets sprouted pomanders stuffed with spices. If you were especially daring, you'd dangle a dead toad around your neck, as if disease could be outwitted by sheer absurdity. Hygiene, during outbreaks, blurred the boundary between medicine and performance art. Public authorities demanded that citizens sweep their streets and toss lime on privies, but in private, people placed their faith in aromatic amulets and religious rituals. The infamous beaked masks of plague doctors housed clumps of herbs and flowers, not because they thought it looked theatrical, though it does, but because they believed the bad air, or miasma, carried pestilence. These medieval PPEs weren't just about protection, they warned onlookers that death was pacing their streets. Personal hygiene, by modern standards, was often heroic in its absence. Bathing was regarded with suspicion, especially in times of plague when physicians speculated that opening the pores made you vulnerable. Instead, layers of clothing, sometimes steeped in camphor or spirits, kept the body sealed, like an overcooked dumpling, from hostile winds. If sweat accumulated, it was a badge of prudence rather than poor hygiene. Surely, a well-defended body was a ripe, odorous one. Nor were public responses rational or uniform. In 1665, as London's Great Plague raged, government orders called for the slaughter of animals within city limits, blaming pets for spreading infection. But when bodies piled up, and the stench of mass graves overwhelmed the Thames fog, the real panic began. Church bells tolled daily, rumour fed on rumour, and every passing smell, burnt feathers, vinegar, gunpowder, became freighted with apocalyptic meaning. Aromatic self-defense morphed into civic ritual, fumigations, processions, hurried prayers. Yet, amid all this, humour and defiance surfaced. Satirists mocked the sheer futility of sweet cures and stinking shields, while street hawkers peddled cure-alls and plague waters with the patter of carnival barkers. Nothing smells as ripe as opportunity. Oddly, some accidental wisdom did seep into these chaotic centuries. The quicklime and strong-smelling smoke used for purification wouldn't stop a virus, but they might drive out fleas, plague transmitters in disguise. Meanwhile, the quarantines and border guards, often enforced with threats of violence, helped keep the devastation contained, at least patchily. Public health, it turns out, has always been a mixture of real knowledge, lucky guesses, and collective superstition. As epidemics raged and receded, the only constant was the arsenal of defense, fiery ointments, herbal garlands, and hope. It's easy, from the safety of antibiotics and a sealed-off ICU, to mock ancestral coping mechanisms. But when the enemy was odorless, relentless, and poorly understood, even the most outlandish rituals offered a whiff of control. To live through history's great plagues was to accept that sometimes, whether through garlic, incense, or prayer, survival depended as much on the nose's evidence as the mind's. So when disease swept the land and dread became its own miasma, people didn't just fight germs, they fought uncertainty. Garlic may not cure the plague, but it will, at the very least, keep anxious neighbors at bay. In the long history of epidemic response, even the oddest rituals represent the desperate, inventive hope that survival could be grasped, if not by reason, then by ritual, smell, and stubborn will. The parapets are less a safe haven than a wind-battered confession booth. High atop these stone ribbons, you can steal a glimpse of the world beyond the walls. Peasant fields sprawl, stitched by hedgerows, dotted by dung heaps and huts smoking with dinner fires, each hinting at lives harder but often freer than yours. Here, where the gusts buffet you and loose your cloak about your legs, the air seems clean, or at least, cleaner than what's trapped behind the heavy oak doors and banners emblazoned with someone else's destiny. The wind is both a warning and an invitation. It reminds the sentries standing guard just how thin the line is between privilege and peril. Sure, you're above the muck and rabble, clad in chainmail or velvet. Yet cold fingers seek your bones just the same, and out here you can't quite ignore the responsibility, or the restlessness, gnawing at you. The trust given to those atop the castle is a heady, double-edged thing, and anyone who's paced this wall at midnight knows that even the thickest stones can't entirely wall out doubt. Suppose you're a guard, you pace, you stamp your feet, you nibble on a chunk of last night's bread, and you try not to listen too closely to the voices floating up from the yard below, a cook's curse, a smith's hammer, a prisoner's plea. Your mind drifts as far as the horizon, where the freedom of peasants almost seems enviable, until a sharp curse of wind flings your own doubts back in your face, smelling faintly of the latrines or the kitchens, depending on the direction. Yet for all its faults and smells, the castle wall is a vantage point. It's a place to watch the roads twist away into forest and fog, to squint for banners on the morning wind, friend or foe, tax collector or troubadour. On certain days, the wind brings news before the messengers do, bearing the scent of rain, fire, or hope, each as tangible as a turned key. Even the crows are messengers, black-feathered and unbothered, hopping from crenellation to crenellation as though they rule more than the king inside ever could. Below, peasants tend strips of muddy land, the wind snapping their hair or scarves in sharp little tempests. Their world is closer to the turn of the seasons, the moods of the earth itself, and their complaints can be swept away with the next gale. Up here, the wind is less forgiving. It sharpens questions, carries secrets, and makes you wonder, if the walls fell, whose side would you stand on? This is where the duality of the castle comes into focus. Protection and imprisonment, pride and fear, each as real as the wind that cuts through your armor or seeps into the cracks of your defenses. Is it better to be cold and at liberty in the fields, or warm and safe but forever watching the weather from behind battlements? The wind, it seems, refuses to answer. Still, there's something honest about the wall and the wind. There are no tapestries here to hide stains, no politicking but what's shouted against the elements. The stone yields nothing but perspective. If you wait long enough, your thoughts will do as the wind does, circle, sweep, and eventually find the cracks in your certainty. As dusk draws a cold line along the horizon, the walls offer up their final lesson. Sometimes, all you can do is lean into the wind and breathe deeply, hoping it leaves you cleaner than you arrived. Yet you never quite forget. What's inside the castle may shape your fate, but what blows on these walls reminds you how easily fate can shift. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks, or to continue in this tone for other sections. Every castle has a would-be wizard boiling something strange. The combination of vinegar, brimstone, goose fat, and hopeful muttering is enough to make your eyes water. It's easy to picture the medieval alchemist, sleeves scorched and eyebrows slightly singed, hunched in a corner of the castle, surrounded by clinking vials and suspicious fumes. For every proper laboratory, there were a dozen damp tower rooms repurposed as makeshift chemistry sets, their shelves packed with ingredients ranging from the sensible, honey, saltpeter, to the outright alarming, dried toad, a suspiciously acquired lock of hair. The air of secrecy was thick as the smoke billowing from their crucibles, part science, part theatre, and always guarded from the prying eyes of the credulous and the cautious alike. The more prudent stewards might have rolled their eyes at the latest experiment, though the chance of sudden riches was often enough to gain a passing interest from even the most skeptical lord or lady. Did it matter that Gregor the groundskeeper was now slightly green around the edges after sampling a draught intended to ward off melancholy? Not quite, so long as last year's crop of turnips continued to flourish. Alchemy straddled an awkward line between science and superstition. Recipes were closely guarded secrets. One batch of elixir might promise eternal life, another might only clear your sinuses, and sometimes both at once. The instructions drifted rapidly from the plausible to the poetic, resulting in concoctions better suited for storytelling than for investment portfolios. Despite the modern tendency to scoff, these experiments contributed kernels of genuine discovery. Out of all this trial and error, mostly error, came advancements in distillation, metallurgy, and the rudiments of serial experimentation. Sulfur might have stained the tapestries and singed the drapes, but it also offered the early alchemist a comforting illusion of progress, and sometimes a genuine breakthrough. The boundaries were blurry. Where did alchemy end and early chemistry begin? What separated the dreamer from the scientist, except a penchant for more dramatic hats and some very stained table linens? The castle alchemist was an entertainer as much as anything, a figure both feared and occasionally celebrated. Their concoctions might serve practical purposes, an ointment for the lord's bruised ego, a draught to encourage the humors when the weather turned foul, or be entirely performative. Clouds of colored smoke, a file that glowed in the dark, or a theatrical explosion to mark the passing of a comet. Servants whispered tales of shadowy experiments gone awry, of poisons powerful enough to fell an ox or mixtures that could reveal the presence of witches, though suspiciously, only if administered to the neighbor's chickens. So, the next time you think of a castle, don't picture only armored knights or regal banquets by candlelight. Remember the faint tang of sulfur drifting through the stairwell, the soft hiss and bubbling mutter of a distant cauldron, and the enduring hope, however misplaced, that this next batch of vinegar, brimstone, and goose fat might just change the fortunes of everyone within those stone walls forever. But to those in the thick of the hunt, it's more than trophy and triumph. It's the story of survival, told over and over in firelight and between teeth. A hunting party is less of an event and more of a rolling thunder. Dogs coursing ahead, men crouched and iron-limbed, all eyes fixed on the twitch of brush or the wild snap of a branch. You don't sign up for a chase like this because you expect an easy win. You do it because there's something primal inside, a hunger to pit muscle and wit against the untamed. A hunting party assembles long before the sun's up. The camp is alive with sound, the scrape of knives on whetstones, boots crunching frost, hounds pacing with impatient energy. Men mutter to each other, swapping predictions about the weather or the whereabouts of the boar's last tracks. There's an art to this anticipation, half ceremony, half calculation, as each hunter packs his own ancient bag of tricks, lucky charms, slings, old bones for the dogs. Someone slaps a back and calls out a joke lost in the morning fog, but nerves are tight. Even the sky, bruised and still, seems to be watching. Once the hunt is on, everything moves in a controlled chaos. Dogs yelp and scatter. Bows are drawn, then lowered, drawn again. The undergrowth flashes with little glimpses of movement, something brown and quick, then gone. Breath comes sharp and cold in the chest. A good hunting party knows how to work together almost by instinct. One man signals with his hand, another circles wide, a hound's bark sharpens everyone's focus. Every sound in the forest might be the quarry or just a trick of sound and light. In these moments, the line between animal and human narrows. Each must read the forest as language, each must react in perfect synchrony. The chase is the main event, but the aftermath tells the story. Fur tangled with blood and brambles, wood smoke thick in the air, and bellies that ache with laughter and hunger. The kill, when it comes, is both an exclamation point and a question. The final moment when all the effort and anxiety distill into a single shout. The significance is double-edged, pride in the catch and respect for the taken life. For some, it is glory, for others, a ritual as old as speech. Afterward, the camp takes on a fever of celebration and duty. The fire is built up, the game is divided and prepared with hands practiced by repetition and tradition. Meat is salted, skins stretched. There is storytelling around the flames, each tongue-tied by wine and ambition as faces flicker with the shadows. The details of the hunt grow grander in each retelling. The beast was bigger, the dog swifter, the day longer, the danger greater than it perhaps was. This is how hunting parties forge themselves into legend, through the telling, through the scars, through the objects left behind, a bent arrow here, a notched horn there. Yet beneath the camaraderie and bravado, a hunting party is built on trust and shared risk. Every hunter knows the hazards, the boar's tusk, the slip of a blade, a moment's distraction. There is deep satisfaction, too, in returning together, battered but unbroken, sharing what has been won and what has been survived. This isn't just sport, it's the blueprint of communal life, blood, bread, and belonging, sealed with each successful chase. In the end, the dogs doze by the dying fire, men pass out under blankets heavy with the good ache of exhaustion, and overhead, the moon hangs unimpressed. The wild is never tamed, only visited and respected. And so the hunting party sleeps, wild dreams curling around their hearts, ready for the next battle of game and guts. No matter how grand or fortified, a castle's thick walls, hidden passages, and echoing chambers offer a tempting haven for intruders of the smallest kind. Mice slip silently through cracks in the stonework. Rats tunnel beneath flagstones and feast on scraps from the kitchens. The relentless siege is biological, not military. The defenders? Not only men-at-arms, but a small, silent brigade of whiskered vigilantes, the castle cats. These feline sentinels are everywhere. Beneath tapestries, behind barrels in the cellar, curled atop storeroom sacks, and sometimes even perched loftily on windowsills surveying their territory with cold calculation. Unlike the ornamental hounds tethered in the courtyard or the horses kept for show, these cats are hard-working, almost invisible, and utterly indispensable. A day in their life is a pageant of stealth. The night belongs to them. When the torches have been extinguished, and the rhythm of human life has dulled to snores and the shifting logs in the fire, the cats begin their patrols. Whiskers twitch, ears flick, and paws pad silently across flagstone floors. Their movement is a shadow within a shadow. They nose out the tiniest rustle, a tail sweeping across grain, the faint skitter of claws, the whisper of potential prey panicking in the darkness. It's a thankless task, but sometimes the castle dwellers remember their silent custodians. Early in the morning, behind the buttery or along castle corridors, one frequently finds the aftermath of a successful hunt, a grisly bundle of fur, teeth, and tail, strategically deposited as proof of duty fulfilled. These feline trophies might inspire a chorus of indignation among the downstairs staff, but pest corpses mean fewer chewed stores and less risk of contaminated food. In a sense, the dead rat is the castle's badge of honor, an aromatic assurance that the cats are on the job. If you listen closely during the day, the The gossip of servants includes tales of feline heroism. There are stories of a single ginger Tom purging an entire wine cellar of a rat colony, of a calico queen fearlessly facing off with a stoat. But mere animals seldom hold the balance of hygiene and safety quite like the resident cats. Sometimes, the cat's methods cross the line into outright intimidation. Mice are deterred not just by the threat of claws, but by the ambient odor of several generations of predators. Skeptics may scoff, but anyone who's walked into a medieval storeroom knows that the tang of feline presence hangs thick in the air, equal parts musk, fur, and a certain sharpness that signals to rodent intruders, beware. And for all their necessity, castle cats have a peculiar autonomy. Unlike dogs, they aren't commanded nor trained. Their loyalty is earned, not bought, and their affection, when given, is fleeting. Yet it is this very independence that makes them so effective as pest control officers. They're insiders and outsiders, attached to the bustle of human life but always holding something of the wild. To befriend the castle cat is to win the favor of a creature who, for generations, has made prowling and protecting part of daily ritual. In the end, while grand tapestries and gleaming chandeliers symbolize the wealth and power of the castle, it's the patrolling cats who preserve the castle's stores, safeguard its feasts, and, through their carnage, keep unwanted guests at bay. The next time you smell that unmistakable scent as you wander the ancient halls, remember, it's the aroma of victory, hard won in the midnight corridors by a four-legged sentinel with silent paws and deadly purpose. Right before you eat, take a deep breath, if you dare. Sometimes something's off. Maybe it sat a bit too long, maybe it was always suspicious. You can try to mask it with spices, but your nose knows. Food is supposed to be inviting. The aroma of a slow-cooked stew or freshly baked bread should pull you closer, not push you away. But every once in a while, your anticipation is met by a sudden, sharp warning. Something's rotten. That warning, sharp and immediate, is one of nature's oldest defense systems, a pungent red flag, honed over millions of evolutionary meals. Spoiled food gives off a signature scent, a complex cloud of molecules produced by bacteria as they break down carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. There's the infamous sour milk tang, or that eye-watering whiff from a forgotten piece of fish. Consider the refrigerator clean-out, one Tupperware triumphantly staving off decay and another, hidden behind the orange juice, quietly becoming a biohazard. One tentative lift of the lid and it's game over, the room is evacuated, and everyone's appetite is cancelled. Sometimes, it's subtle at first, a faint whiff that you think you might be imagining. But once you recognize it, there's no going back. That hint of off evolves rapidly into an unmistakable, invasive stench. Think gym socks marinated in vinegar, or the musty, rotten egg blast of sulfur. We've given polite names to these odors, earthy, fermented, but they're rarely the kind you write home about. Of course, the drama doesn't stop at the refrigerator. Imagine a long-awaited holiday feast, family gathered around and dishes passed with excitement, when suddenly someone hesitates. They ask, uncertain. Silence falls. Every head turns. Panic creeps in as everyone sniffs, keenly aware of the thin line between culinary delight and digestive disaster. Forks hover, half-raised, as the risk is weighed in real time. At moments like these, nostalgia battles common sense. Someone insists, nose wrinkled in hope. Some cultures embrace strong, even borderline offensive food odors, aged cheeses, fermented fish, intensely pungent durian. But there's a world of difference between something expertly fermented and something simply forgotten behind the cheese drawer. One is intentional and revered, the other is the result of time, neglect, and maybe a broken fridge. Oddly, many of us play this dangerous game more often than we admit, smelling leftovers, conducting the sniff test, gambling on expiration dates. And despite warnings, curiosity occasionally wins out, leading to a brave, ill-advised taste. Regret, if it comes, does so swiftly. Is a phrase usually followed by a grimace, a dash to the sink, or a vow to never ignore the nose again. Yet, in a strange way, ruined food can bring people together. Misery loves company, after all. These stories become part of the family lore, cautionary tales we recount as we warily check the best by dates and peer suspiciously into saucepans. In the end, your nose is wise. It's the prelude to every meal and the warning bell for every culinary misadventure. So the next time you catch a whiff of something questionable, remember, it's not just food. It's a story in the making, one way or another, and a reminder that not all feasts are worth attending. It's raining. The thick, mineral tang of wet stone mixes with wood smoke, woolen cloaks, and general wet dog. Your only consolation, at least you're not outside. But inside, things aren't exactly cozy, either. Rain patters against narrow windows, seeps through cracks in old mortar, and gathers in shallow puddles along the drafty hallways. You can picture it, a small chorus of children squabbling over the warm spot by the hearth, dogs shaking off rain with little concern for where the water lands, and servants cursing under their breath as they try to keep the worst leaks at bay, using whatever cloth, straw, or old cloak they can find. The castle's walls, usually imposing and protective, now glisten with condensation. The great tapestries meant to keep in the warmth instead soak up moisture and clutch it greedily, adding an undeniable dampness to the air. Footsteps echo on flagstones, slippered or booted, soggy but persistent. A gust brings another whiff of cold rain, and maybe something a little less poetic from the stables below. Meanwhile, fires struggle on. A stubborn curl of wood smoke hangs in the rafters, unwilling to leave the comfort of the halls and doing its best to flavor every mouthful with a hint of burning oak and moldering sock. The people crowd nearer to the warmth, hands extended, faces pink from heat and the ever-present tang of smoke. Your eyes water, you try not to sneeze, and you definitely try not to imagine how many times that cloak beside you has gone unwashed. Meals feel less like feasts and more like practical experiments in avoiding soggy bread. The pastries are limp, the stews are hearty because they have to be, and the cheese, well, the cheese always smells like it belongs outdoors, no matter the weather. Someone tries to cheer the group with a story, but it's hard to outshine the comic slapstick of 16th century plumbing. A chamber pot spill, a muddy dog, an aunt who thought she could dry her socks over the fire before dinner, she could not. And yet, somehow, there's laughter. There's music, always music, echoing off damp stone, performed by brave souls whose fingers are as numb as their ears but refuse to stop playing. There's a kind of camaraderie that only miserable weather can create, people sharing cloaks, complaints, and, most importantly, suggestions of where the next leak might spring up. Even bedtime becomes its own adventure. Mattress ticking clumps with moisture, and the straw beneath seems to multiply in its ability to poke and scratch. Still, people snuggle in, feet seeking warmth beside someone else's. Someone drapes a sodden wool blanket over themselves with the stoic resolve of a seasoned camp survivor. Above, the steady drip-drip of a leaky roof might drive you mad, unless you count yourself lucky not to be in the drafty garret upstairs. As you drift off, remember, medieval castles were less Downton Abbey, more downtown dog park in a rainstorm, but somehow, people thrived. They dined, danced, loved, and occasionally remembered to change their tunics. The smells may have been legendary, but so was their resilience, and their ability to find joy in a world where air freshener meant hanging a bunch of rosemary over the door and praying for a strong breeze. So tonight, nestled in your clean sheets, with hot water on tap and a mattress free from hay and hedgehogs, maybe offer a silent thank you to the generations who endured centuries of stench, struggle, and spectacularly optimistic hygiene routines. History is sometimes absurd, often unfair, but almost always hilarious in hindsight. You don't have to fight off wild boars to defend your cheese, or sniff test your mattress before lying down. For one night, let yourself be grateful for all the strange, stubborn, hopeful humans who braved it all before you, and let their fragrant misadventures carry you gently into sleep. As you drift off, remember, medieval castles were less Downton Abbey, more downtown dog park in a rainstorm, but somehow, people thrived. They dined, danced, loved, and occasionally remembered to change their tunics. The smells may have been legendary, but so was their resilience, and their ability to find joy in a world where air freshener meant hanging a bunch of rosemary over the door and praying for a strong breeze. So tonight, nestled in your clean sheets, with hot water on tap and a mattress free from hay and hedgehogs, maybe offer a silent thank you to the generations who endured centuries of stench, struggle, and spectacularly optimistic hygiene routines. History is sometimes absurd, often unfair, but almost always hilarious in hindsight. You don't have to fight off wild boars to defend your cheese, or sniff test your mattress before lying down. For one night, Let yourself be grateful for all the strange, stubborn, hopeful humans who braved it all before you, and let their fragrant misadventures carry you gently into sleep. Good night.